Imagine a world where men stepped up and answered God's call to reach their full potential. Imagine a world where men put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where men lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christian men from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and unapologetically Christian. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Tim, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing well.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to have this conversation. My guest today is Dr. Tim Griffin. Tim was born in California, where he spent most of his life and briefly attended Santa Ana Junior College and Liberty University before earning his undergraduate degree from Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College and a Master of Arts from Moody Graduate School in Chicago. Tim later earned a Doctor of Education from Grand Canyon University, where he served as university pastor, dean of students, and vice president of student affairs for the last 13 years. In total, Tim has over 25 years in clergy positions, ranging from being a pastor and chaplain to university minister, while also having experience in public relations, recruiting, fundraising, and resource management. In his spare time, he's a bit of a handyman. He likes to break things to fix things around his house, and he loves to get out in nature for hikes. He's been married to his wife for 41 years, and they have 2 sons and 4 grandchildren. Tim, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Thank you, Ed. I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor.
Well, I was really excited whenever you accepted the invitation because, as I shared with you before we pressed record, I'd spent 8 years at GCU, and I remember meeting you like 6 or 7 years ago, and I was just praying that you remembered me or remembered my name.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's been so many people that have come through GCU, whether they're students or staff, and usually a name will ring a bell, and my computer goes on search. I'm looking for that photo of the face to put with the name, and so as soon as you came up on the screen, it's like, oh yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up at GCU.
Well, I came from a ministry background. When my wife and I got married back in 1982, we were plugged into a local church in Southern California, and we were beginning our young married life in a church setting, a local church setting. And I launched from there to work for a small Bible college as their PR guy, and went around the Southwest United States, really Northwest too, and recruiting students and doing kind of PR for the college, and then went from there to pastoring churches. So I pastored churches for about 12 years and then moved into a parachurch ministry. And that parachurch ministry allowed me to serve the world of motorsports, which I really didn't have a background in, but I was introduced to motorcycle racing, and that spilled into boat racing and car racing. And so I ended up as the chaplain for NASCAR, and that kind of gave me an itinerant ministry around the country and some points around the world. And it was great fun. Did that for about 12 years. And then our sons were going off to college, and they were student athletes, and GCU had the sport that our kids played, which was volleyball. Our oldest son came here to play, and our younger son followed him a couple years later. And while our oldest was here for a year, maybe a year, I don't think he was a sophomore yet. I think it was his first year. I spoke in chapel and did that a couple times. And so they asked me if I would be interested in being the campus pastor. And I said, thanks, but no thanks. I had worked really hard to kind of position myself in a unique community that needs somebody that they can trust. And I felt like, I need to keep my head down. And so I said no, and they circled back a few months later and said, would you reconsider? And they said, wow. Well, they're coming back a second time. I said, send me a job description. And so they did. I showed my wife, and she says, man, this sounds like you. And I thought, okay, well, now it's over. She has spoken. And it really was perfect timing for our family, perfect timing for me professionally. And GCU was a small school with a big vision. And that was now 14 years or 13 years ago. I'm starting my 14th academic year. And it has been, the ride of a lifetime, to be honest with you.
The growth of the university has been remarkable. I mean, you've seen most of it starting your 14th academic year. I saw a good portion of it. Over the last 15 years, it's grown, it surpassed Liberty as, at least in terms of student enrollment, as the largest private Christian university in the country. What do you attribute the growth and success to?
Well, I think a lot of things. I think that President Mueller has had a big vision about the hybrid model of housing different modalities of learning platforms, whether it be in-person traditional campus experiences or online learning. And the marriage of those two things was very unique back 15, 16 years ago when those two modalities came together. And I think, he's a growth guy and wanted a big college experience. And I don't think there's a lot of options for students who want to be in a faith-based or Christian environment to do their academic program that provides a large university experience. And so I think that is part of it as well. The third aspect of it is we have not raised our tuition since I've been here. And so the affordability of coming to a private university really provides a lot of opportunity for students to get an education without a lot of debt, some with no debt when they leave the university. So I think the combination of those things, the very unique model that it is, the growth of the university, the size of it, giving some size and scale to a big university experience. And lastly, just the affordability. I think the combination of those things have really been genius. And God has just shown his favor to us. And we've got students from all walks of life that are coming here.
Yeah, for those listening that aren't overly familiar with Grand Canyon University, here in Arizona, there's billboards all over the valley that say paint the valley purple. But with GCU recruits students from all over the country and really the world. It's really paint the country purple in many ways. During your time there, what's the thing you enjoy most about GCU?
Well, I didn't see it coming, to be honest with you. When I came here, my whole professional life had been dealing with adults, people in the marketplace, people in church life, that just, that was kind of my focus, dealing with professionals in their personal settings or their professional settings. And I got here and I was surrounded by college students, and I had never been a student pastor. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm, old enough to be their dad because my son was here and the younger son was on his way. And I thought, I don't know the first thing about being a student pastor as such. And so I was the father figure. I had a kid run around campus, being a crazy college student. And so the students really embraced me as kind of a surrogate dad, so to speak. And I mean, they just didn't really allow me to be myself. And so I didn't feel the pressure to be the cool, hip campus pastor guy because I wasn't that. And I was just a dad that fell in love with college students. And I fell in love with this stage in life because once I got here and I saw my boys make some good decisions, some bad decisions, and they transitioned out and started their adult life. And during that time, I started reflecting on my own life and when I made really critical decisions about the trajectory of my life was during these years, between 18 and 21. And so I was here thinking, my goodness, what an incredible opportunity to really shape lives, where I've been dealing with hard, seasoned professional people or family people and church people. And I thought, man, that's just such a steep climb in many ways. And here you had students that are like, I really need a grown-up to talk to, or I just want to be around an adult. I'm around kids all the time, and this guy just seems to be walking in the student union or down the promenade, and he seems like he's approachable and easy to talk to. And for me, it was just what I had done in my ministry life is just be available to people. And here I was being available to people that were very hungry for direction and guidance and support. The combination of those things just made me fall in love with college life. And so I can't seem to get away.
In 2015, you published a blog for GCU discussing ways to find creative and compelling ways to experience the things that are near the heart of God. What have you found along the way, and in what ways has he exceeded your expectations?
Well, I was introduced to ministry and, kind of a professional Christian persona, an experience in church life. And you define everything, as a pastor, everything seems to get defined or often is defined by what happens in the church proper or on the church property, within the building or within the property lines, the parking lot, the setting of a church building. And so that was really where I cut my teeth on experiencing God, was in a church setting. And not that you don't do that there, but as a pastor, as a staff person in a church setting, you can control a lot of the elements of that experience. The music, the message, what they experience when they get in the building or drive on the property with greeters, or the whole thing from start to finish. And so that's where I learned, how to experience God. And then I got outside of that in a marketplace setting where you don't control the environment. And you have to respond to it. You have to react to it. You have to embed yourself in it in ways in which you can see God use you in a situation that you cannot control. And for me, it completely flipped my experience of how to experience God, because I saw him show up. As I mentioned, when I left the church, I went into a parachurch organization and worked in motorsports. And motorsports is built for racing, for big business, media, celebrity kind of environments, but they're just real people at the end of the day. And so I had to walk into their space and to figure out how to position myself in relationship or in settings where God would use me. And it was incredible to see a conversation happen, next to a stack of tires. And most people may not know what I'm referring to, but if you know a car racing garage, or stacks of tires everywhere. And I would park myself by a stack of tires, and somebody would stop and put their arms up on that stack of tires across from me, and I'd have this little 3-foot by 3-foot office. And man, they would share things about what was going on in their life or their job, and man, we would just meet, and I would see God show up in those little settings to where people would be in tears or sharing prayer requests or asking for guidance from God's word. And it's like, wow, I just had to make myself available and God would do things. It was incredible. And so that kind of launched me. Now it happens on a college campus. I often will not schedule a lunch meeting to go find something to eat by myself, park under a canopy or in a corner of a room, and invariably a student will come over. Hey, Tim, you got a minute? I see you're eating by yourself. Can we talk? Pull up a chair. And then you never know where the conversation is going to go.
Yeah.
So it's super cool. And, I learned that before I got here. And once I got here, it was like, oh my goodness, now you have really interested people in trying to learn about how God can show up in their life in very unplanned, unscheduled situations. And so for me, and I hope this gets to your question, that's how I've seen God really step into the lives of others without some of the controllable elements that we as humans really want to control, especially when it comes to ministry oriented oriented people. And when you get a taste of seeing God just show up in unplanned moments, whew, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, it occurs to me that sometimes we just need to make some space to be able to do that, right? Because I mean, we're constantly busy, a lot of distractions. I mean, getting hit in so many different directions, but having those moments where we're able just to kind of sit and be and let it ultimately be what it is, whether it's in silent reflection, prayer, meditation, or striking up a conversation with others.
Yeah, I shared this week we have student leader training going on campus, and one of my little talks I shared from Psalm 46, and the psalm ends with God saying, "Be still and know that I'm God." That we are not. He doesn't say that in the passage, but there is that point at the end of Psalm 46 where we're being challenged. You need to just hit the brakes, hit pause, and just realize that God is God. And when you get a taste of that in ministry, that He is controlling things, He is going to accomplish His will, and He's going to allow us to be a part of that if we give space and time and acknowledge that He is God, and we let Him truly lead and guide in certain situations where we prayed that forever, in closing church prayers. But, when you get out into spaces to where God really has to show up, and you be quiet and step back and let Him do what He wants to do, oh, He will show up in force, and it's fun to be a part of it.
I'm interested in how you came to know Jesus. Did you grow up in a Christian home, or if so, what was your exposure? If not, how did you end up developing a relationship with Jesus?
Well, I did not grow up in a Christian home. My mom and dad had some religious exposure when they were young, but they never walked with the Lord my whole time at home, growing up in their home. And I came to Christ when I was 18. I was a senior in high school. I had kind of dipped in and out of church because I was living a pagan's lifestyle, and I would go to church because I felt guilty, and I knew that there were good kids there my age, and they would invite me to go, and I'd show up, and I'm like, yeah, these are some good kids, but I'm really enjoying sin. I didn't say that to myself. It just,
Yeah.
that was the course of my life. And when I got to my senior year, all of a sudden the light started going on that I'm about ready to step out into a new world. I'm getting out of my educational experience and confines like I had experienced up until graduate, preparing to graduate from high school, and all of a sudden I felt very vulnerable and very unprepared for what was happening, and ended up going to an outreach event at a church on a Friday night and trusted Christ there, and was a nominal believer at best. And I was headed off to college to play baseball, and ended up going to a local JC, and then recruited to go back to a university back east. And I did both of those. And while I was young in my faith and trying to reconcile my love for athletics, my sport was baseball, and my love for Jesus that was starting to emerge. And I was trying to serve two gods, and one didn't have any mammon associated with it. I had a love for the game, but I had this growing love for the Lord, and I could feel like, man, I'm serving two masters here, and I got to figure this out. And so that's when I left, my collegiate career to go to this little Bible college, because I knew a bunch of people there that were trying to follow Jesus. And I'm like, I need to be around those kind of people, not the kind I've been running around with for all of my life. So I was introduced to Christ in a local church outreach event, and started being discipled by some of the folks that I had met in that church that kind of took me under their wing. And then I started on this collegiate pursuit of trying to grow up and grow my faith, and landed at a little Bible college that surrounded me with great people that were following Jesus. And I was taking my cues from them, most of them good, some of them weren't great, but we were all trying to figure it out. And that was kind of how I got launched into my walk with the Lord. Really, I mean, it really started with kids in my neighborhood that saw me living the life that I was living, and they, hey, why don't you come to church with us? I'm like, yeah, I probably should. And I'd show up, and I'm like, yeah, a bunch, they're square, you know, I want to go do something else. And but then I kept coming back, and it's like they had something that I didn't have, and it really got to me. So
It's really fascinating how effective God is at nagging us.
yeah, great way to put it.
And you touched on something that it brought a smile to my face. You said you grew into two loves, baseball and the Lord, or baseball and church. And it just reminded me of something I heard years ago, that church and baseball have something in common. Many attend, few understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very true. Now, during your time at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College, did you have any men that stepped into your life that served as a mentor for you?
Well, yes, actually, it was interesting. That college, and I really didn't have any interest in being in pastoral ministry. I, I saw how church worked, from the pew or from the chair, from the sideline, if you would, and I, I respected those that were on the platform and had great admiration for what they were doing to lead a congregation of people. But when I went off to Bible college, the real motivation was I don't know the Bible. I don't know really godly people my age. So I'll just enroll. And so everybody around me, for the most part, they want to be a worship pastor or a missionary or a teaching pastor at a church or Christian school leader, something like that. They're all in a vocational ministry track. And I'm like, well, I don't know if I can do any of these things, but God, I'll just show up and I'll get the car rolling and you're going to have to steer it because I have no clue of what I should be doing. And so because that little college was geared for those kinds of people, it didn't have a lot of what a lot of colleges or universities have, which is a lot of extracurricular, fun, collegiate kind of things. You had a population that were a little bit older, of people that kind of not, and some seminary aged kind of folks. And so I would go to class and there would be 30 and 40-year-olds in class with me. And I was, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. And I'm trying to figure this out. And I'm thinking, I'm talking to dads and guys that are husbands and people that had careers that are now enrolled in this college, trying to figure out how to prepare for ministry or to go to the field. And so it kind of came by osmosis. I really didn't have to go ask people to be a disciple. We just go to lunch and sit at lunch. And I'm a 21-year-old, ex-baseball player, if you would, and sitting across from somebody that's had a professional career for 10 or 15 years who feels led to ministry. And all of a sudden, we'd have these conversations and they were discipling me. They were mentoring me. And it was kind of indirect. And so I lived about 45 miles from campus, so I didn't live on campus there. So we'd all carpool. So I get in a car with ex-military guys and ex-school teachers and, that were preparing for ministry, and we'd pile in a van. And we would drive back and forth to campus. And all of our classes were in the morning. They're all over by noon, so everybody would work a swing shift or a midnight shift. And it was a perfect situation, but most of the students were older than me. And we'd talk in the van. And then we'd talk over lunch before we'd leave campus to come back to jump in our cars and go off to work. So I didn't have the formal one-on-one, we're going to go through this book together, but I was being mentored by these folks in the van ride to and from campus, or over lunch or over coffee or in between classes or in the library. So that's kind of how I was mentored and coached and started finding role models for how my life should look. and it had gaps in there. I mean, there were moments where I needed somebody, and it usually would be a pastor type at my home church where I would, hey, we need to close the door. I got to talk. A little deeper issues, but that general faith walk that I needed to learn kind of came in those other settings.
What would you tell a young man who is just kind of struggling, trying to find his way about the significance of having a mentor or an adult man in their life to help them navigate those moments that you were able to navigate, even though it wasn't in a formalized setting?
Well, and I wish somebody would have told me this. That's a great question. I think those that want to mentor, I think really need and would benefit from somebody saying, hey, listen, would you step into my life? An invitation to step into somebody's life, I think is really, really important. If somebody is initiating stepping into somebody's life, that can be a little off, I think, can be a little off-putting. If a young believer or a young person is saying, and not always is a young believer a young person, but if somebody really feels like they need somebody in their life, a seasoned believer in their life, to invite people in, to schedule a meeting and sit with them in whatever setting to say, I need help. I need you in my life once a week, once a month, once every quarter, depending on how it works, to sit and talk with me about some of the questions I have about my life and how I should live it. I think that invitation really does open a door to where somebody that wants to mentor or who could mentor does that. I mean, one of my more recent ones came from a guy, and we still connect, not like we did, for about 3 years, but he was working in professional basketball, and we met up at a tournament in Las Vegas, and he said, I'm not around many believers, and could we get together on the phone? And so for several years, we didn't use Zoom or Teams or anything like that. We just got on the phone and we talked for an hour once a week. And he lives in another state. And we decided after a few meetings and conversations that we're going to read a book together. And so we read, man, a whole library of books over those 3 years. So we didn't go to the local coffee shop. I mean, we did it over the phone, and it was incredible. And often those phone calls would end with me hanging up the phone going, man, he ministered to me as much as he wanted me to minister to him in those conversations. So it can happen in a variety of ways. But that it came as a result of having lunch together in Vegas and him saying, man, I need somebody to talk to. Could you and I get together? And I said,
What a great
absolutely.
example of iron sharpening iron.
Hmm.
I love that. I mentioned this to you before we started our recording, that last fall, and I brought this up on numerous occasions throughout these conversations, that I had 5 young men approach me separately asking me, what does it mean to be a man? They were extending that invitation, at least for me to answer the question, but it actually led to some mentorship opportunities for me, which were extraordinarily rewarding. But beyond that, how would you answer a young man if he came up to you and said, Tim, what does it mean to be a man?
It is a great question and a really important question that I think men should be asking and should be wrestling with and should be in pursuit of finding answers for. So I I think if a young man asks me that, and it happens, every year, every month, is to affirm you're asking the right question. So let me just start there. I think sometimes we will define what it means to be a man by making observations, and we can learn things by just watching others, right? But sometimes we may draw the wrong conclusions, like, oh, I've got to look a certain way to be a man. I've got to, or I take my cues from what I see on TV and or in film. or printed pieces, which isn't very popular anymore. But that's where I take my my input or my definition of what a man should be. And I think it needs to move beyond that to say, I need to talk to men versus just to observe what men do. Now, observing is important, but to have a conversation with other men to say, tell me what it means to be a young man, to be a single man, a married man, a retired man. What does it look like to be a man? So to have that exchange, I think, is really important. Because I think sometimes even those of us that want to mentor, or others perceive us as somebody that could mentor, probably feel a lack of confidence at many levels to say, I don't know if I've got the right handles to answer those questions sometime. So it really becomes a walk together to say, let's figure out what God expects from us. And I might be older than you, I might be more experienced than you, but I might need some of the lessons that you've learned in your young life. And so this is going to be a shared relationship. So I think that that's really important, really, really important. So I would say a man doesn't always have to be an independent victor. If they're going to be to grow and develop, they need to be in relationship with other men. You referenced that scripture of iron sharpens iron. I mean, that's all about relationship.
Yeah.
And so I think if a young person is asking me, what does it mean to be a man? It means you need to be in good, healthy, strong, meaningful relationships with other men. And you're walking together. And when you fail and when you succeed, you do that together. You do that in community. And don't try to make it an individual, independent journey. So, the American way is to, be an independent conqueror of land and mountains and dragons, right? And
Right.
I think if we will learn from a more biblical perspective, Jesus didn't need anybody, but he called people to be in relationship with him. The 12, the three, that had a little different level of relationship with him, I think that is so important. So I think that's probably where I would start with a young man, somebody that's interested in what it means to be a man. To me, it means to know how to have good, strong, meaningful relationships that will allow you to be sharpened by others. And then there's a myriad of topics that we could probably address, but I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah. You've been married for 42 years. How did you meet your wife? And what's been your secret sauce for making your marriage work for 42 years?
Oh my goodness. That's a great question. I'll be honest with you. And I'm going to answer that question probably differently than a lot of people who will say they've been married for 40 plus years. And I mean, it's being married is a struggle. I mean, I do talk to a lot of men, Christian men who, oh man, we're best friends and we've never had an argument. I've heard that over the years. It's like, oh my word, my wife and I have gone around and around about things, at times. I think part of the secret sauce is that when we said, we committed ourselves to each other, when we said I do, we meant it. I mean, it's like it may be until death, and we may kill each other, but it was the sense of commitment that we're in this together, and God brought us together, and we'll see this thing through, even through the hard times and the difficult times. So I think one of the other things that I've really been reminded of is, it's easy to look at the homes that we've come from and blame, our weaknesses on our family of origin and what we bring from that makes it difficult for us sometimes in our married lives, to not also look at the things that are a benefit to our marriages that came from our homes of origin. So I didn't come from a believing home, neither did my wife. So when we came to Christ, we were brand new believers with really no reference point for how to be a good husband and a good wife. from a Christian perspective. I mean, we were looking at each other like, what do we do next, right? There are some things that came instinctively, but there are other things we really don't know how to do a lot of this as a Christian couple, and we're still learning, to be quite honest with you. So I don't know if there is a secret sauce other than the commitment and the commitment to weather the challenging moments, the difficult conversations, the ups and downs. One of the things I learned from my wife, or I learned about God and his timing, his timeliness. That's not the right word. His design of when he brings people together, that he sees the future that we don't see. So when we got married, I tried to talk my wife out of, her desire to be married. Like I had a desire to be married. It was like, I'm going to be a pastor. I'm not going to have any money. We're going to be poor. You ready for that? You sure you want to do this? Are you ready to sign up for that? And she just looked at me like, yes. So we were living on love, right? And then we got into pastoring. We didn't have two nickels to rub together for most of our ministry lives. And then I took a job, my parachurch job, when I left pastoring local churches, do this traveling job. I thought, man, I'm going to be gone a lot. And how is this going to work? I mean, we had two little kids in the home, and I've been invited into this new ministry endeavor that did fit me well in a lot of ways that I was very excited about, and she was as well. And I thought, how are we going to do this? And she didn't bat an eye when I said, I'm going to have to travel. And what didn't dawn on me until that moment was that she had grown up in a military home where she saw her dad travel overseas, and he retired, from the military. And so she had seen her mom just pick up in the home and just move on in the sense of, well, he's not here. He's on deployment. We've got to take care of the house.
Just what you do.
Right. And so
Yeah.
when I left and I would say, hey, I'm going to be gone for the next 3 or 4 days on this weekend. I gotta go. She didn't bat an eye. All right. Call me when you get there. Let me know how it's going. And we'll see you on Monday or Tuesday or Sunday night or whenever you can get home. And I remember thinking that was a gift from the Lord. He saw that years before. I never considered working in motorsports or having an itinerant type ministry. Never crossed my mind, but God did. So knowing that he put us together, knowing that the homes of origin that we came from would really factor in a positive way to a really difficult ministry chapter or a unique ministry chapter. Only God does that.
One final question for you, Tim. Has your faith in God ever wavered?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you get into pastoring and people come into your office and they sit across the desk from you, or you meet them in their homes, and there's just this devastating moment in somebody's life, and you have no answers for them. And they lose a child, they lose their marriage, just the loss that comes with real life. And they leave your office and you go, I should have an answer. Why don't I have an answer? Why would God allow that? If God is good, why do these things happen? One of the best books I ever read in that moment was a book by Yancey called Disappointment with God. I mean, an incredible book. I mean, it's a read. It's not like a little airport book. You're going to have to dig into some really challenging chapters. But I remember reading that. The title just captured my imagination. I said, if somebody's willing to write about having disappointment with God, I want to know what he's saying. It was so insightful and real and painful to read the stories and his own musings about that, and his own reflections on his own ministry experience and his own challenges with disappointment or disappointments with God. And yeah, I mean, I think most people have wavered in their faith, and it happened with me as soon as I got into pastoral ministry years and years ago. And it still is challenging when I have to deal with loss in various forms on a college campus. it can be really hard. Am I trusting the Lord at the level that His people should? And why am I struggling right now? So, man, I'm still a kid. I'm still a kid trying to figure it out.
One of the things I said to my wife a few months ago, and trying to find some description for the infinity and power of God. It's like we could take one line of scripture and study it our entire life and never get to the end of that rope. And it's awesome. And I know for me, that's given me a measure of confidence in those moments where my faith, has wavered. And I certainly hope that you continue just being such an amazing influence and impact, not only to everyone that comes into your life, but especially those young people at GCU. These are really well intended young people that I think in many ways, and I'd love your take on this. I think in many ways that we as adults, we don't give them enough credit for being these good-natured, well-intended. They're just trying to figure this out, and they're interesting even in their silence, even in their confusion. And so I'll turn the floor back over to you on that as a final talking point. Do you share a similar view with regard to what every generation seemingly does to every next generation, which is just to sort of dismiss them?
Yes. Yeah, it's funny. I think when you get to walk with college students or be around them on a day-to-day basis, your level of appreciation and value for them goes up. I think when we get older and our circle of friendships become older and we see these kids over there, we get this we develop a view of them that is probably not accurate and is unfair. And when you get to be with them on a regular basis and you spend time with them and you allow them to speak and you sit and listen as they wrestle with the real important questions of life. Now they're also kids, which is great fun,
Right.
and they have their future is ahead of them. They have great hope and aspirations, which a lot of us adults need, to be around that. But beyond that, they are asking the right questions and they're wrestling with a lot of deep ideas. And many today, because of just how society has evolved over the last number of decades, and it's probably true for a lot more than that, but the modern society is really wrestling with some things that I didn't have to wrestle with when I was their age, and they're wrestling with some really deep issues. And so they have to think very deeply. Some do and some don't, but that's true of adults too. But to be with them on a regular basis, man, the sense of value for who they are and who they're trying to be and the questions that they're trying to discover, needs more respect than I think sometimes we give them as just being young and inexperienced and fickle and flighty and all of that. And yeah, they can be all that, but they're way more than I think sometimes we give them credit for. Yeah, so I appreciate the way you framed the question. We all do that, don't we? We look on the generation behind us and we just kind of dismiss them. That was the word I was thinking of as you were asking the question. I thought, yeah, we do that. And man, that's the great blessing. Not to overuse a church word, but it really is a blessing for me to be living and working and having lunch in the midst of them and watching them play and watching them learn, watching them struggle and succeed and make good decisions, making poor decisions. It's a great privilege to be a part of it.
Tim Griffin, thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation. Before we wrap, would you mind closing us out in prayer?
Would love to. God, thank you for the privilege of being together in this way today. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for those that are listening, and I pray that whatever Ed and I discussed would be of help. I pray that you will take what we've done here and use it for your glory. And may it be used to draw people to yourself and to your ultimate purposes in their lives. Lord, bless the remainder of this day. We commit it to you, and we come with grateful hearts asking for your blessings. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Tim,
Thanks, Ed.
thank you again. I wish you continued success.
Same to you.
Lopes up.
Yeah, what's up?
You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.